The air in the old ranch town carried the dry scent of dust and distant sage, the kind that settled on a man's clothes and stayed with him long after he walked away. A wide sun hung over the wooden rooftops, casting long shadows that stretched across the dirt road like tired arms. Folks had gathered from nearby farms, ranches, and forgotten stretches of prairie for the annual auction, a day when horses, tools, and stories all traded hands. It was the sort of event the town looked forward to, a reminder that life still moved even in quiet places. At the far end of the open yard stood the auction pens, wooden rails worn smooth by years of weather and restless hooves. Men leaned against them as if they had all the time in the world. Women watched from shaded spots beneath canvas awnings. Kids chased each other between wagons, kicking up small clouds of dust that glittered in the sun. It was the kind of morning that felt ordinary on the surface but carried something tense beneath it, as if the ground itself expected trouble. The attention of the crowd kept shifting toward a single pen near the middle. Inside it stood a tall chestnut horse with a dark mane and quiet eyes. The animal looked rough from long miles of work but carried itself with a dignity no hardships could erase. Most of the buyers knew the horse had belonged to a rancher whose land had suffered through drought, forcing him to sell more than he wanted. Though the horse was older and not as fast as younger stock, something about it made people slow their step when they passed. Some said the horse had spirit. Others said it had wisdom. Either way, it made the pen feel important. A wealthy man arrived late to the auction, announced not by words but by the shine of his boots, the cut of his vest, and the arrogance in each step. He walked through the crowd as though it parted for him. He often bought animals not out of need but out of pride, using his money to remind others of his power. He liked eyes on him, he liked whispers that followed. Everyone in town knew him, and not many cared to. With a smirk, he sauntered toward the chestnut horse's pen. The sun glinted off the polished buckle on his belt. His shadow stretched across the packed dirt like a warning. He gripped the railing with a hand heavy with rings and looked at the horse with an expression that held no warmth. The people nearby grew quiet. They had seen men like him too many times. The auctioneer called out information about the horse, tapping his clipboard as he spoke. He mentioned age, training, temperament. Buyers listened with half interest. But the wealthy man seemed more entertained by studying the horse than hearing the details. He leaned in, close enough for the horse to sense him. The animal lifted its head, meeting his gaze with a calm that should have humbled the man but instead irritated him. Someone in the crowd muttered that the horse deserved a good owner, someone patient and steady. Another whispered that the wealthy man did not know how to treat an animal with respect. The air seemed to tighten. People watched the man, hoping he would move along, but he stayed where he was. He reached out a hand as if to test the horse's reaction. The horse did not shy away. It stood firm, eyes clear. For a moment, the scene almost softened. It looked as though the man might show a rare moment of gentleness. But pride had a strong hold on him. He felt the gaze of the crowd, and instead of kindness, he chose mockery. He gave the horse a light slap on the neck. It was not hard, not enough to injure, but enough to disrespect. Enough to make the crowd tense. Enough to say that he believed himself above the creature. A few people gasped under their breath. The auctioneer froze in mid-sentence. A ranch hand near the gate clenched his jaw. The wealthy man chuckled as though he had done something clever. He lifted his chin, waiting for the horse to flinch or bow its head. He enjoyed the idea of putting the animal in its place. But the horse did something no one expected. It took a slow step forward, not in fear but with quiet purpose. Its ears turned forward. Its eyes locked on the man's face with a sharpness that silenced every whisperer around the pen. The horse breathed out a warm gust that brushed the man's vest, but instead of stepping back, the man stood frozen. Something in the horse's stare reached him in a way he did not understand. A feeling passed between them, something steady, bold, and strangely human. The horse lifted its head higher, as if answering the man's insult with a challenge. Its hooves shifted on the dirt, steady and sure. The moment held still. Even the children paused their games. The ranch dog stopped barking. The wind seemed to wait. The wealthy man's smile faltered, though he tried to hide it. The horse was not afraid, and the man had not expected that. He had expected compliance, not confidence. He pulled his hand back slowly, as though the air had thickened around him. The crowd watched with wide eyes. No one dared speak. The horse took another step, pressing the limits of the pen but not breaking control. It simply stood closer, near enough that the man could feel its breath again. Something about the horse's presence unsettled him. The animal's calm was too precise, too intentional, as if it understood far more than anyone believed. The man's pride cracked. A flicker of uncertainty touched his face. He cleared his throat and took one step back from the railing. A ranchwoman near the fence whispered that the horse knew exactly what it was doing. Another said animals sense true character. Those who had doubted the horse before now looked upon it with new respect. Even the auctioneer lowered his clipboard, waiting to see what might happen next. The wealthy man regained his composure and tightened his jaw. He tried to give the impression that he had not been rattled. He brushed off his vest as if dust had dared settle on him. He tilted his hat and forced another smirk, but it came out strained. He opened his mouth to speak, ready to make some remark to regain control of the situation. Before he could, the horse stomped once, firm enough to echo in the pen. It was not aggressive. It was not wild. It was deliberate, as though marking the moment. The sound rang across the auction yard, pulling every eye back to the pen. The wealthy man stopped mid-breath, unsure how to react. The crowd exchanged looks, uncertain whether to be amused or uneasy. The horse's eyes narrowed, steady and fearless. It lowered its head just enough to match the man's height, as though offering a reply without words. A message hung in the air, thick with challenge and meaning. The man hesitated, caught between backing away and standing his ground. Pride urged him to stay. Instinct pulled him back. His fingers dug into the railing. The horse did not move. It simply held his gaze with an expression that seemed to cut through him. The air in the yard felt different now. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat leaned toward the pen. The crowd sensed a shift. Something important was about to happen. Something that would change how they remembered this day. The horse's muscles tightened slightly, signaling a choice. The wealthy man's eyes widened, realizing the moment was no longer his to control. Whatever came next would be the horse's decision. And in that stretched and trembling second, just as the man's pride met the animal's steady defiance, the unexpected reply finally began to unfold. The crowd leaned forward, holding its breath, waiting for the moment that would follow. The horse held its stance a little longer, keeping its eyes fixed on the wealthy man. That steady gaze carried something deeper than simple defiance. It was as if the horse had reached inside the moment and taken control of it. People around the pen felt the shift and whispered among themselves, but no one dared speak loudly. The morning sun, once bright and easy, now felt sharp against the dust in the air, as if the world itself had narrowed around the tension that hung over the yard. The wealthy man tried to shake off the feeling creeping up his spine. He ran a hand over his vest as though blaming the dust for his discomfort. Yet inside he knew the real reason. Something about the horse had unsettled him in a way he had not expected. He had dealt with animals his whole life, but none had ever looked at him like this one did, with a calm that seemed to measure him. The horse did not step back. Instead, it lifted its head slightly and gave a short snort, the kind that announced a thought rather than fear. The man tensed. For the first time, the people watching saw him hesitate, and that hesitation spread through the crowd like a cold wind. They leaned in and tried to read the moment, waiting to see if the rich man would walk away or challenge the horse again. But before anything else could happen, the auctioneer broke the silence with a sharp clap of his hands. He tried to regain control of the event, sensing the tension rising too high. His voice shook a little as he called for the next bid, telling buyers that the horse could be a strong partner with the right guidance. He hoped his words would soften the scene, but they only drew more attention to the horse. The wealthy man stepped away from the railing very slowly. He tried to hide his unease behind a bored expression, but the crowd had already seen the truth in his eyes. He gritted his teeth and turned his back on the pen for a moment, pretending to study another animal. Yet his shoulders remained stiff, and everyone could tell the horse had gotten under his skin. The horse, now calmer, lowered its head. It pawed the dirt once, as if marking the ground where the tension had passed. A ranch worker near the gate let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. He said the horse had a mind sharp as any human. Others nodded. They had seen horses with heart and horses with strength, but rarely one that carried both with a quiet intelligence. A woman stepped forward, curiosity guiding her. She stood at a respectful distance and studied the horse with thoughtful eyes. She murmured that the horse must have a long history behind it, something that shaped its spirit. No ordinary animal would answer disrespect with such controlled presence. The crowd agreed. They wondered where the horse had come from, how it had been trained, and what life had carved that calm strength into it. The auctioneer cleared his throat and began sharing what little background he knew. The horse had belonged to a rancher who lived a few miles outside town, a man known for fairness and patience. Hard seasons and thin harvests had forced him to sell more than he wanted. The horse had worked the land for many years, pulling the plow, guiding cattle, and sharing the silence of long days. It had lived a life of dependable service, shaped by steady hands and honest work. Hearing this only deepened the interest in the horse. The story gave weight to the animal's calm defiance. People nodded, recognizing that long years of trust between man and horse could leave a mark that did not fade. A few wondered if the horse missed its old home, or if it understood why it was here among new faces and uncertain futures. The wealthy man glanced back at the pen, his jaw tight. Something about the story irritated him. He did not like the idea of an animal that carried a history worthy of respect. He preferred creatures that yielded to money and command. He pushed his hat back and muttered under his breath. The crowd noticed the tension in his shoulders, but no one stepped forward to challenge him. They waited instead, sensing there was more to unfold. Meanwhile, the horse turned its head slightly, watching the man even when he tried to ignore it. There was no hostility in its gaze, only a patient understanding, as if it saw beyond the man's show of pride. The wealthy man felt that weight again. He tried to brush it off with a laugh, but the sound came out thin. A young ranch hand, leaning on the fence, shared a quiet thought with the people around him. He said animals had a way of reading souls. They understood fear, anger, pride, and sincerity better than most folks admitted, horses especially. He said this one looked like it had seen many seasons and carried the wisdom of them. The crowd murmured in agreement. A man beside him added that the horse might have sensed something the rest of them overlooked. Something hidden beneath the wealthy man's polished boots and trimmed coat. If the animal had reacted so firmly, maybe there was a reason that went deeper than a simple slap. The idea traveled through the listeners and made them look at the wealthy man with new eyes. The auctioneer tried pushing the sale forward, but the energy of the moment resisted. The crowd remained caught in the tension between the horse and the wealthy man. The air felt heavy with questions. The horse's reply had been silent, yet filled with meaning, and the man's reaction had revealed cracks in the confidence he wore like armor. Still, the sale had to continue. The auctioneer called out an opening bid. A few people raised their hands with cautious interest, but their eyes kept shifting toward the wealthy man, waiting to see what he would do. For a man who thrived on an audience, he now seemed trapped by their attention. He forced himself to step closer again, determined not to look weak. As he approached the pen, the horse lifted its head, meeting his gaze once more. The man paused. The silence between them thickened. The crowd held its breath again. This time, the horse did not move toward him. It simply stood tall, calm and watchful. The man stared back, but the steadiness of the animal's eyes unsettled him far more than any aggressive charge could have. It was as if the horse saw something inside him he had spent years hiding, something he did not want others to see. He swallowed hard and tried to shout a bid. His voice wavered. People noticed. The horse flicked its ears as if hearing something deeper than the man's words. The atmosphere tightened once again. The auctioneer hesitated, unsure whether to accept the bid or wait. The ranch workers exchanged glances. Something about all this felt bigger than a simple sale. They had seen animals react strangely before storms or during times of trouble, but this felt different. It felt personal. The wealthy man stepped even closer to the railing. His hand tightened around the wooden bar. The horse shifted its weight, watching the man with that same sharp understanding. The crowd leaned in, unsure what the animal would do next. The horse's breath rose in warm clouds in the cool shade of the pen. Its muscles stood firm beneath its coat. Its eyes never left the man's face. A whisper moved through the crowd like a small wave. People wondered why the horse reacted so strongly, why it had stepped forward in defiance earlier, and why it continued to stay alert. Some believed the animal sensed the man's intentions before any of them could. Others said the horse carried a history that clashed with the arrogance standing before it. Whichever it was, no one could deny the clash between the two. The wealthy man and the chestnut horse stood facing each other with an intensity that stretched the air thin. The auctioneer tried once more to steady the moment, but it was the horse that decided the next movement. With slow, deliberate steps, it turned its head and looked beyond the wealthy man, toward the far horizon where dust trails drifted from unknown places. It held that stare as if listening to something distant. The crowd grew confused. The wealthy man frowned, feeling the attention slip away from him again. He stepped closer to reclaim it. But before he could speak, the horse swung its head back toward him with a sudden focus that silenced every breath around the pen. The horse's stance tightened, its ears pointed forward. Its gaze sharpened. Whatever message the animal was about to deliver carried the weight of something old, something shaped by years of work, loyalty, and memory. And just as the wealthy man raised his hand to assert control, the horse prepared a reply that would shift the entire outcome of the auction in a way no one expected. The moment held, tense and unbroken, waiting for the next heartbeat to decide everything. The horse did not move at first. Its breath rose softly in the warm air, steady and calm, but something deeper worked behind its eyes. The wealthy man kept his grip on the railing, trying to hold on to the scraps of confidence he still had. The crowd waited in tight silence, every person sensing that the tension between man and horse had grown into something larger than pride. It felt like a test, though no one could say what the rules were. The auctioneer shifted his footing, unsure how to continue. This was supposed to be a simple sale, like any other day, but the atmosphere in the yard had changed so sharply that even the cattle in the nearby pens grew quiet. A dog sat near a wagon wheel, ears perked, watching the horse with full attention. The town felt smaller under the weight of the moment. Then the horse made the next move. It lowered its head and pressed one hoof forward, slow and deliberate. The motion carried a strange power, as though each step meant something more than a shift in balance. It lifted its chin slightly, eyes fixed on the wealthy man. A murmur swept the crowd. They had seen proud horses before, stubborn ones and wild ones, but this quiet confidence unsettled them more than any frantic behavior could have. The wealthy man forced out a laugh. He tried to make it sound bold, but the sound cracked around the edges. He told the auctioneer he wanted the horse, that he would pay whatever price it took. His voice carried through the yard, but it held a tightening strain. He wanted to show he was still in control, still the man with the deepest pockets and the loudest authority. The auctioneer nodded, though he hesitated. He called for other bids. A few hands lifted, cautious but steady. One belonged to a ranch woman who had watched the horse with thoughtful eyes earlier. Another came from an older man at the edge of the crowd, someone who rarely spoke but always observed. The wealthy man's jaw tightened. He looked around sharply, irritated that anyone dared challenge him. But there was more at play now. The horse had shifted the dynamic, turning the sale into something that felt less like business and more like judgment. People whispered about what they had seen. Some believed the horse understood the character of each bidder. Others thought the wealthy man was forcing something he had no right to force. The mystery thickened. The ranchwoman stepped forward again and called out a price. Her voice was steady. She said she had raised and trained horses for years and knew how to listen to them. She believed this chestnut horse needed someone who respected it. The wealthy man snapped at her, telling her she did not understand the value of an animal like this. His words were sharp enough to sting, but she stood firm. The horse lifted its head toward her voice. The movement was small, yet the crowd noticed it. Even the wealthy man noticed. His irritation deepened. He clenched the railing so tightly his knuckles paled. He called out another offer, louder and more forceful, pushing the numbers higher. The auctioneer swallowed, sensing the conflict growing hotter. A young ranch hand near the fence quietly shared his thoughts with a few listeners. He said the wealthy man was afraid, though he masked it with money. He said the horse knew it too. People nodded. They had seen confident men before, but fear wrapped in pride always revealed itself in moments like this. The older man at the edge of the crowd raised his hand once more. He did not look at the wealthy man. He simply watched the horse with calm eyes, as though remembering something from long ago. His bid was modest, not nearly enough to compete with the wealthy man's rising offers, but something about his tone carried quiet respect. The horse turned its head slightly toward him as well. That small gesture sent a ripple through the yard. The wealthy man noticed it and frowned deeply. He called out another price, far higher than before, almost careless. People exchanged uneasy glances. They knew he was bidding out of pride now, not interest in the horse's well-being. Something about that felt wrong. A ranch worker near the gate spoke under his breath, saying he had seen animals react to the truth behind a person, not the words in their mouth. He believed the horse sensed something dark or dishonest in the wealthy man. Others listened closely. The tension continued to build. Then a subplot began to surface, one whispered quietly among the people who had grown up in this town. Some said the wealthy man had taken land from struggling farmers in the past, using loopholes and pressure rather than open theft. There were stories of ranchers forced out after a season of drought, rumors that money had been used to push them into corners they could not escape. None of it had ever been proven, but the shadows of those events clung to his reputation. And now, with the horse responding only to those who carried calm sincerity, people began wondering if this moment was exposing the truth behind the wealthy man's mask. The ranchwoman raised her bid again. She held her ground with a steady resolve that impressed even those who doubted her chances. She spoke kindly toward the horse, saying it deserved a future shaped by respect. The wealthy man sneered and challenged her once more. His voice shook slightly, betraying the frustration building inside him. The horse flicked its ears but kept its eyes locked on him. The auctioneer shifted again, now visibly unsure. This was no longer the controlled environment he was used to. He cleared his throat and tried to bring order, but the energy of the moment overpowered his authority. The wealthy man's frustration snapped. He stepped closer to the pen, leaning in so far the horse could feel his breath. He whispered something sharp, low enough that most could not hear, but the intention was clear. His jaw was tight, his expression flushed with irritation and bruised pride. The horse reacted instantly. Not with aggression, but with a movement so subtle yet powerful that the entire crowd felt it. It lifted its head high, muscles tightening. Its eyes sharpened, narrowing at the wealthy man with a controlled intensity. Its stance grew stronger, more certain. It was ready to respond. People felt a chill. They could not hear what the man said, but they knew it carried disrespect and anger. And the horse had understood. The horse stepped forward again, not with force, but with a purposeful confidence that made the wealthy man flinch. His feet stumbled back half a step. The crowd saw it clearly. His face burned with embarrassment. He quickly tried to cover the reaction, but it was too late. The horse had stripped away another layer of his pride. The ranchwoman stepped closer, calling out softly to the horse, trying to calm the rising tension. Her voice carried a tone of care that traveled easily through the charged air. The horse turned its ear toward her for a brief second, reminding everyone that it could choose gentleness when met with sincerity. This only fueled the wealthy man's anger. He raised his voice, shouting a new bid even higher than before. The crowd gasped. It was a reckless amount, one no reasonable buyer would offer for any horse. People realized he was no longer bidding for the animal. He was bidding to win against the horse itself, as though the animal's defiance was a challenge to his authority. The auctioneer hesitated. The yard quieted again. Dust hung in the air. A long breath passed through the crowd. The ranchwoman hesitated, unsure if she could continue bidding, though her eyes showed she wanted to. The older man watched the wealthy man with a look of disappointment, as though seeing a storm forming before anyone else understood its path. The townspeople exchanged whispers of worry. The wealthy man's final bid hung in the air like a heavy weight. The horse stared at him, its eyes did not waver. It stood tall, unshaken, as if it knew that money could not break its spirit. For a moment, the entire yard seemed to stop and wait for the horse to decide how it would answer this new height of pride. Then, with a steady grace, the horse lifted its head and prepared to deliver a reaction that no one in the crowd, not even the wealthy man, expected. The tension rose again, stronger than ever, pulling everyone into the edge of anticipation as the next moment approached. The horse held its stance for a long moment, so steady that even the dust floating in the sunlight seemed to pause. The wealthy man stood rigid near the railing, his breath short, his pride stretched thin. The crowd waited in tight silence, each person sensing they were close to a turning point, though no one understood what shape it would take. The tension moved through the air with the weight of a storm still gathering, refusing to break. The horse lifted its head higher. The light caught its mane and cast a gold glow across its neck. Its eyes locked on the wealthy man with a calm so firm it felt unshakable. The man refused to look away. His jaw tightened, forcing himself to stare back. He wanted to prove he was not afraid, but the tremor in his fingers betrayed him. The horse saw it, and the crowd saw it too. The auctioneer tried to speak, but the words lodged in his throat. This was not the usual rhythm of bidding, not the predictable raising of hands and clipped announcements. Something deeper pulsed through the yard, something that had grown far beyond the rules of a simple sale. He looked from the man to the horse and realized that the next move might decide more than the outcome of the auction. The wealthy man straightened, trying to regain his dominance. He repeated his final bid loudly, making sure everyone heard his confidence. But his voice shook on the edges, cracking like old wood. He pointed at the horse with a stiff gesture, insisting that he deserved it, that he could handle it, that no one should challenge him. People exchanged uneasy looks. His desperation showed more clearly than any of them had expected. The ranchwoman, still standing a few steps away, watched him with concern. She knew the signs of a person pushing beyond reason. She understood pride, but she also understood the danger of letting it consume someone. She spoke gently, telling the auctioneer that rushing the moment would only make matters worse. Her voice calmed a few listeners, though the air remained heavy. The older man at the edge of the crowd stepped forward slowly. He did not bid again. Instead, he looked at the wealthy man with a steady gaze that held years of wisdom. He reminded him that an animal like this chestnut horse was not won through force or coin. He said that true partnership came only to those who understood the heart behind the creature. His tone was kind, but his message hit harder than any challenge. The wealthy man bristled. He said he did not need lessons from someone who lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of town. His voice quivered with anger. The horse flicked its ears, picking up every emotion hanging between them. The crowd shifted nervously. The tension grew, but there was no sign of release. The horse stepped forward again, the movement so smooth and controlled that everyone fell silent. It lifted its head toward the older man for a brief second, acknowledging something in his voice. Then it turned back to the wealthy man and held its gaze in place, unwavering and firm. It felt like the horse was giving the man one last chance to understand something important, a chance he had not yet recognized. The wealthy man clenched his hands. He stepped right up to the railing, leaning so close the horse could nearly touch him. His pride burned brighter than his sense. He whispered sharply at the animal, as if trying to frighten it back into weakness. But the horse did not budge. It only watched him, calm and steady. The crowd grew still again, sensing another shift. The ranchwoman stepped closer to the horse, lifting a hand to calm the tension in the air. She did not touch the animal, but her presence softened the moment. She told the wealthy man that fear could not be masked by loud words. She said horses were born with enough instinct to see through false strength. He snapped at her, telling her to stay out of it. His voice cracked once more. The horse's muscles tightened in response. Not in aggression, but in awareness. It took another firm step toward him. The wealthy man stumbled back again. This time the crowd gasped openly. The truth was on display now. The horse was not the one shaken. It was the man. A chorus of murmurs rose from the onlookers. Some whispered that this seemed like a test of character unfolding in front of them. Others said the horse had recognized something in the man the moment he slapped it earlier. There was a growing belief that the animal understood more than they thought. The mystery around the horse deepened, wrapping itself around every heart present. The auctioneer finally took a breath and attempted to settle things. He announced that the horse would not be rushed into a sale that did not suit its future. His voice carried more authority than before. He stepped toward the pen with a careful calm. He spoke softly to the horse, acknowledging its strength. The horse listened but kept its attention fixed on the wealthy man. The wealthy man felt the crowd slipping away from him. He saw doubt forming in their eyes, and it made him panic. He raised his voice again, shouting that the horse was his by right of the highest bid. His tone turned harsh, almost pleading under the anger. The ranchwoman shook her head gently. The older man looked away, disappointed. The horse responded to the heavy note in his voice. It took a slow step forward. Its shadow stretched across the ground until it touched the wealthy man's boots. The man froze. He could not retreat without showing fear again, but standing still felt equally impossible. His breath shortened. The horse lifted its chin and stared directly into his eyes. The tension in the yard reached its tightest point. People held still, even the animals nearby grew silent. The wind seemed to pause. It was as if everything in the world waited for the next tiny shift of hooves or breath. The horse leaned slightly closer, not enough to threaten, enough to force the wealthy man to face it fully. The man's pride wavered, crumbling under the weight of the moment. His eyes flickered with something the crowd had not seen in him before. Not fear, not anger, something quieter. A crack in the armor he had worn for years. The ranchwoman stepped closer, watching every flicker of emotion between them. She did not try to interrupt. She simply waited, sensing that this moment mattered. The older man nodded slowly, recognizing that the horse was doing more than reacting. It was revealing the truth about the man who wanted to own it. The wealthy man swallowed and tried to steady himself. The crowd leaned in, hearts racing. They did not know what he would do next. The auctioneer watched, frozen in place. The horse waited with perfect stillness. In that deep silence, the wealthy man raised his hand. The crowd tensed. The horse did not flinch. The man's chest rose with a shaky breath. His eyes locked with the horse's, and for the first time he truly saw the calm intelligence staring back at him. The weight of the moment pressed into him, cutting through the fog of pride he had lived inside for so long. The horse lowered its head slightly as if offering him a chance. A chance to change, a chance to understand, a chance to choose a different path. But before he could take it, footsteps sounded at the far end of the yard. The rancher who once owned the horse had arrived. His posture was tired and his clothes worn, but his eyes held quiet strength. He stepped toward the pen with slow, measured steps. The crowd turned to him with surprise. His presence added a new layer to the tension. The horse lifted its head sharply, recognizing him even from a distance. A deep emotion stirred in its eyes. The wealthy man noticed and stiffened. The rancher's arrival shifted everything. The crowd spread out slightly to let him through. He reached the pen and placed a hand on the wooden rail, looking at the horse with a kind of familiarity that made the yard fall even deeper into silence. The horse took a step toward him, its posture changing from tense awareness to something softer and more loyal. The rancher whispered gently to the animal, and for the first time since the start of the auction, the horse's tension eased. The wealthy man felt the balance tipping away from him again. He lifted his chin, trying to look unfazed, but his hands trembled. The rancher nodded once, acknowledging the crowd, before turning to the wealthy man. He asked him calmly what he hoped to find in a horse like this. It was not a challenge, but a simple question that cut deep. The wealthy man had no ready answer. He stuttered, unsure. The rancher kept his gaze steady, waiting. The horse stood between them, acting like a silent judge. The auctioneer, sensing the entire gathering leaning toward a turning point, stepped closer too. The ranchwoman and the older man stood side by side, watching everything unfold. The crowd inched forward, breaths held. Everything had led to this moment. Every step, every stare, every shift of emotion. The wealthy man stood trapped between the truth in the rancher's eyes and the understanding in the horse's. He had only one chance left to decide what this moment would become. And just as he opened his mouth, the horse took a bold, deliberate step toward him, lifting the entire yard into the highest peak of suspense they had felt yet, leaving everyone in a breathless anticipation of what would come next. The wind softened as the sun shifted over the plains, carrying the smell of warm dust and fresh hay toward the town that had once held its breath watching a horse stand its ground against a proud man. Word of what happened at the auction had drifted far past the fences and farms, and by the time the next dawn arrived, the story had become something larger than the men who lived it. Folks told it with awe, calling it a sign, calling it a wake-up for the wealthy man who used to walk with his chin raised higher than any hat brim in town. Now he walked quieter, slower, almost humbled. And beside him, the horse he once mocked moved with steady steps, almost protective, as if the two had started sharing a bond they never looked for but now depended on. He had named the horse Lantern. No one knew why at first, but when someone asked, he simply said the animal brought light to a place in him he had forgotten about. That answer settled well with the people because Lantern had a glow in his eyes that made him seem more aware than an ordinary horse. There was something wise in the way he looked around, something calm in the way he stood near children or lowered his head when someone sad tried to pet him. It was as if Lantern carried a quiet message for anyone who crossed his path, and everyone felt it. Life began shifting after the intense moments at the old barn when voices had risen and tempers had nearly turned into something worse. The wealthy man knew how close he had come to losing everything that mattered. His lands had started failing before that day, his workers grew uneasy with his anger, and his own home had stopped feeling like a place he belonged. Lantern changed that first by resisting him, then by saving him from his own downfall. The man could not forget the way Lantern had stood firm against the slap, and then answered with a reaction that shocked the crowd yet somehow adjusted the man's direction in life. As days passed, the man started spending more time at the stables instead of the big house on the hill. He learned Lantern's habits, the small things that comforted him, the things he feared, the sounds that calmed him. He brushed the horse's coat with his own hands instead of calling on a worker to do it, and the long strokes against Lantern's back began to work on him too. He found his anger loosening. The morning chores that once seemed beneath him now felt grounding. When neighbors came around to ask how he was doing, they found him standing in the pasture instead of behind a polished desk. The change did not happen overnight, but each sunrise seemed to peel away another layer of pride. Lantern grew more attached to the man as well. He followed him even without a lead rope, nudging his arm gently whenever he sensed the man falling into old ways of thinking. They became a pair often seen along the fence lines, walking and watching the open land. Some evenings the man would speak softly as if telling Lantern the things he could not tell another person. Folks who saw them said the horse listened. But beneath all this calm, the world around them stirred with new trouble. The conflict that had shaken the barn that day did not fade into the background as easily as the man had hoped. There were still people who doubted his change of heart, still men who wanted the land he owned, still tension brewing between ranchers who believed strength came from force instead of respect. Lantern's presence soothed much of it, but not all. Shadows lingered around the edges of the community, shadows that watched the wealthy man's transformation closely. One of the main sources of tension was a dispute over water rights. Drought had pressed down on the region, turning once green fields into fading memory. Every rancher competed for access to the river that ran thin through the valley. The wealthy man's property touched a major piece of it, a stretch long enough to make others jealous. In the past, he guarded it selfishly, blocking smaller farmers from drawing even a bucket. His men patrolled the riverbank day and night. That old reputation did not disappear easily, even though he had opened the gates now and allowed fair access to all. Some ranchers trusted his newfound goodwill. Others whispered that he was only pretending to change to avoid retaliation or to win public favor. Suspicion ran high, and there were those who believed conflict was only waiting to explode again. The man tried his best to keep peace by offering support, lending tools, and helping fix broken fences, but every day felt like he was walking on thin ice. Lantern sensed the rising tension before the man even spoke of it. The horse paced more often, ears flicking at faraway sounds. Sometimes he would stand still and stare toward the valley as if expecting someone to appear. The man tried to calm him with steady pats, though he felt the same unease brewing inside. Something was coming, he could feel it. The pressure grew heavier when rumors spread that a rival rancher was planning to challenge the man's access to the river despite the new open policy. This rival had always been outspoken about his dislike for the wealthy man, long before the incident at the barn. He claimed the horse's defiant act was not a message but a sign of weakness, and he insisted that the wealthy man was fragile now, ready to be pushed aside. Folks tried to stop the gossip, but whispers travel quickly when land and pride mix together. The wealthy man knew he needed to address the tension, yet the thought of returning to old habits frightened him. He did not want to fight. He did not want to fall back into arrogance or aggression. Lantern nudged him often during those moments, as if urging him to stay steady. Days passed with small signs of unrest. Someone left the ranch gates open one night, allowing cattle to wander out. Another time, tools went missing. A fence was cut clean at one corner. No one admitted to anything, and no one saw who did it. The workers grew worried, glancing over their shoulders more often. The wealthy man felt every move tightening around him, but he refused to respond with anger. Instead, he rode Lantern into town to speak calmly with community leaders. He wanted to assure them he meant no harm, that he wanted cooperation, not conflict. Many believed him, but a few still doubted. The rival rancher stood across the street that day, watching with narrowed eyes, arms crossed, face set in a challenge everyone could feel. Lantern stepped forward slightly as if sensing danger, positioning himself between the man and the rival rancher. That small gesture caught the attention of everyone nearby. It was clear that the horse would defend his rider if needed, though he remained calm. Tension deepened when word spread that a meeting would take place at the riverbank to discuss final division of water access. It was set for the next evening, and nearly every rancher in the region planned to attend. The wealthy man knew it could spiral into conflict if not handled carefully. Lantern stayed close to him during preparations, never letting the man walk far without brushing against his shoulder. On the day of the meeting, the air felt heavy, pressing down on the valley like a silent warning. People gathered around the riverbank, hats low, faces serious. The rival rancher arrived last, his expression unreadable. The wealthy man stood near Lantern, who seemed strangely alert, as if he knew everything mattered at this moment. The meeting began with calm discussion, but it did not stay calm for long. Someone accused the wealthy man of manipulating the situation. Another claimed the rival rancher had been stirring trouble to gain control. Voices rose, hands gestured sharply, and the crowd edged toward chaos. Lantern pawed the ground, sensing the shift. Suddenly a shout cracked through the tension, turning every head. Accusations flew harder, louder. Two men stepped toward each other in anger. Someone else tried to pull them apart, but that only fueled the fire. The wealthy man stepped forward to speak, but his voice was swallowed by the noise. Lantern moved beside him quickly, pushing his chest against the man's arm as if urging him to stay grounded. The crowd began dividing into sides as conflict swelled. The rival rancher stepped forward, ready to make a bold claim that could ignite everything. In that instant, the wealthy man realized the entire valley hung on what happened next. His next words or actions had the power to either protect the fragile peace he had built or shatter it completely. Lantern's eyes locked with his, steady and bright. And the moment stretched, waiting for the choice that would decide the ending of everything they had fought for.